Well, we all know about Wall Street and what is happening these days with regard to the economic recession and the debts and the crisis and demonstrations and all of that. But some people, particularly in the media, say that there are different demands, conflicting demands, and this and that. But when I listen to a few speakers or just random people talking in these demonstrations, I notice that there's quite a cohesiveness of what these people want, which is, from what I understand, what I see, what the majority of people in this country and all across the globe desire and wish. Some of the questions are perhaps not very difficult, and some are very difficult to solve. So in this segment, what I'd like to do is just to list for you, based on 10-15 minutes of listening to some of these arguments, or just reading the recent issue of Time magazine, as to what these issues are. This is a recent issue of Time magazine, which has discussed some of the issues with a few demonstrators in New York, and these seem to be the issues that most people say. One, abolishing extremes of wealth and poverty. Based on the last report, 1% make an average of $1.5 million a year. The remaining 99%, the average comes to $54,000. Of course, the lowest 20% are basically unemployed, and many of them homeless and in a lot of difficulty. Now, this is in terms of income. Now, in terms of net worth, it becomes even worse, which means net worth is your assets minus your debt, therefore your true ownership. So what happens in this method of extreme of wealth accumulation is that day by day, on a daily basis, it gets worse. It gets worse. I watched a video which said that, just imagine if Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago had $1 and had invested this $1 based on the interest rates that the banks and financial institutions charge the average people who can't afford to pay it. Let's say an average rate of 7%. How much do you think that $1 would come to for the descendants of Jesus Christ after 2,000 years? Just calculate, every 10 years it doubles. Every 10 years it doubles. So $1 would come to trillions of dollars. So if your father or your grandfather was wealthy, and based on the Bush's tax rebates, the wealthy do not pay inheritance tax for a number of years, and therefore they get richer and richer, and the resources are limited. So all the resources would be accumulated for them. So based on that, basically the top 1% own, that's the net worth, is approximately 43% of all resources in this country, in the US. The top 20% own, the net worth is 85% of the total net worth of the whole country. Just imagine. So the remaining 80% of the population basically have 15%, and the lowest 20% basically have nothing. So this is what the extreme of wealth and poverty is, and the masses of people say is enough, and this is unfair, this is unjust, this is unchristian, this is Jewish, Muslim, Baha'i, whatever you want to call it. This is not human. Next thing they're saying is to end wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, bring the troop home, and use the money to build factories and put people to work. Well, that's also another issue, but rather complicated. You know, some people say Osama bin Laden, who was from Saudi Arabia, one of our allies, who had gone to Afghanistan and who was funded by US to to fight the Soviets, together with Taliban, the extremist Muslim in that region. And so then after the Soviet Union fell, and after Afghanistan, they left Afghanistan, then it became a no man's land, and the Taliban and Osama Al-Qaeda group and all that took over. So there were also previous allies who were now enemies that US decided to destroy, and with spending of billions upon billions of dollars. And then of course the other one, Iraq. Same story. Mr. Rumsfeld, the defense secretary, went to Iraq in order to fund them, to give them items, things that became chemical weapons to use against Iranians, and over 1 million people were maimed and 1 million people killed, and a good part of that region destroyed. But then again, it was Saddam Hussein who invaded Kuwait, and so during the first reign of the President Bush, they went and liberated Kuwait, and so left him intact. And so he was there for a number of years, a decade or so, after that event, and then they falsely accused him of being in bed with Al-Qaeda and the perpetrators of 9/11, and they went to get him, finally. But that was false pretense. But the fact of the matter is that he was a very brutal dictator, had killed perhaps over 300,000 by some estimate of his own people in the most brutal manner, whoever opposed him and opposed his regime. And so the debate between honest people in this country, some people say it has nothing to do with us, or we care less, or we care, but it's not our job. And some people say it is our job to be the policeman of the world. So these issues are not as simple as some people think, but they're still very relevant, important issues that need to be addressed honestly, clearly, by politicians, by university professors, by wise people in the country, and have a dialogue with people. We're not having a dialogue. We're just having a pseudo-political fight in the Congress among two factions who don't listen to each other, who just fight one another. 3, another demand is that we need more transparency, and therefore there has to be regulation for campaign contributions. The thought is that 1%, perhaps a few percentage more, basically control us and control the economy and control everybody. But this is the country which is democratic, and everybody should have a voice. And therefore there has to be regulations as to who funds who and who upholds whose values and all of that, so that the masses will also be involved. 4, they say that we need a culture that puts people before profits. Well, capitalism is based on profits, so this becomes an antithesis. But perhaps that idea is not also so far-fetched when we look at it more carefully. The point is that the companies become more profitable by cutting costs, including labor costs. So therefore, if you and I are employees of a company, for the most part, based on the brutal capitalistic system, they care less about you or I. We are disposable assets. The soonest they can get rid of us, they would get rid of us. Some people say this is not human, this is not right. We have to become a family in that cooperation. Work with each other, for each other, the shareholder, the management, the labor. And there's a point there too. Now, the way the capitalistic system is defined is that you become most efficient, you become most profitable, and then you give this incremental additional wealth to your shareholders. So everybody else is dispensable. So then, but in this process, they have an agent, though that agent is the CEO. So what do they tell him? They tell him that the more brutal you become in the system, that's my understanding, the more people you lay off, those people who are paid $8 an hour, $10 an hour, barely surviving. Many of them don't have even health insurance, cannot afford their own health insurance. With $10, $15 an hour you can. And then they would tell that if they can lay them off, they would lay them off. And then the shareholders' agreement with those CEOs is that the more efficient you become, in effect, the more cruel you become and the more efficient you become, and the more profit you make, will give you a share of it. But then the share that they give to that CEO, 10%, 20% of that additional income, is okay, because that doesn't hurt the bottom line. If you pay the worker, it hurts the bottom line. So the solution that many people suggest is that if you want to give profit sharing, give the profit sharing to the workers, to the management, and to the CEO. Don't just single out the CEO and give him all that money, all those millions of dollars. Share it with all the employees who survive in that business. Make it as efficient as you can. But then at the same time, if you make profit, and that profit should be invested, reinvested, and we should find other ways of employing more people. Five, the political and economic and ecological systems should benefit the masses and not the select elite group who have all the influence. Again, along the same line, that a democracy should be a representative democracy, that we should all represent it. It should not be an elite group who have all the money, who have all the people that they can send to Congress and basically defend their rights in order to manipulate the system for their own selfish benefits. That's not fair, that's not just. 6, have better regulations on the banks and Wall Street so that they can continue the rampage on the treasures and resources of this country to enrich themselves. That's, I guess, obvious. Regulations for Wall Street, regulation for the banks, so that they won't continue to enrich themselves without consideration of the masses. In this country, we're all together, and we have to take care of each other. This way of discarding people is not human. 7, eliminate capital tax breaks and make the tax-paying playing field more balanced. Again, in the system of only enriching the richest and taking care of the richest, they would say that the capital gain tax is 10% or 15%. But then if you're an average guy and you're making 100,000, 150,000, then your income on tax rate could become 30%, 33%, 36%. And of course, most richest people, that 0.1 of the 1%, the top richest 400 people who are pocketing an average of $1 million a day. This is $125,000 an hour. They're not working for that money. It's just the money that is sitting there, and they don't care about you or I or this country, because that's money. Money doesn't care about USA or China or Russia or whatever other country is. They would ship the money to wherever they give them a better return. And you can't blame them either, based on that system. So there's a systemic problem in the system that needs to be addressed. And therefore, the masses say that, okay, if you want us to pay taxes, they have to pay taxes too. And the taxes should be fair and equitable and just. And if they have more, they have to pay more. And you have to close the loopholes. And this idea of, they call them job creators, they don't know that themselves. All they, if I had millions of dollars, if there was a factory which was profitable, fine. If not, I would probably, if I'm just thinking of money, I would ship it to Nicaragua or to China. Of course, other people benefit. And that becomes the question of globalism and global issues and how can we deal with global problems so that we would find ways that the masses would not suffer and that 1% do not accumulate everything and all the benefits just for themselves. We have to find ways. And many honest, decent, rich people would agree with this thesis. That yes, I can't see my neighbor and my friends and my fellow citizens to suffer, to be hungry, and I have all this luxury, all these yachts, all these cars, all these mansions all across the globe. There would also come a time, particularly when they come my age, and you'll say, I'm not going to take it with me. And if there's a God, that God could be your conscience, would start bothering them. That's why a lot of rich people, toward the end of their life, they start sharing at least a portion of it, 10% of it, 20% of it, 25% of it, with their fellow citizens. But that may be too little too late, because the damage is already done in the course of 50, 60, 70 years, that they have just accumulated and sat on that huge pile of money. 8, they say they cancel the giant pool of bad mortgage debt, investigate bad loans on Wall Street, and create a financial transaction tax. So basically in this respect, they're saying that no, they have given a lot of bad debts, bad mortgages, and just sit down and deal with them. And some work has been done in this area, but apparently not enough. A lot of people have lost their homes. Not their fault, they were given a loan. They either lost the job or the home value became much less than the loan that they had given, so they wanted to move, and the house was worth 50%, 60% of what they had loan on, so they would just have to vacate and leave. So that's another problem that needs to be addressed. 9, change the political system to care for the people rather than only the big and irresponsible banks, investment firms, and corporations that the top guns consider too big and too important to fail. That's another big issue. President Obama and before that President Bush, the Federal Reserve Bank, they bailed out the most incompetent banks and Wall Street financial institutions and corporations, the failing, incompetent organization. Then they said they're too big to fail. They're too big to fail. So we will save them. We'll give them trillions of dollars of new loans or whatever way they help them. Taxpayers' money that the average guy has to pay back. And so they, in turn, they save themselves of that final disaster of closing. And then they start enriching themselves again. That's part of the system. Okay, you give us the money, now we're profitable. We make huge profits, but it's going to go to our pockets and to the CEO pocket. They say that's part of the system. And tough luck with everybody else, because everybody else is disposable. They're saying 99%, but it's basically 80%. It seems to me the 80% are disposable in this system, and something has to be done. 10, they say that government should find ways of creating jobs for the masses and putting them back to work, as President Franklin Roosevelt did after the Great Depression. This is a Great Recession. It may be depression, we don't really know the extent of it, but it is bad. And so President Obama has been trying, and many people in Congress has been trying. I don't know whether it's lip service or it is actually what they want to do, but they say that we have to repair the roads and bridges and put all people back to work and all that, but of course a lot of people are refusing to go along. And they have a point too in saying that we have to find a way to fund it. And of course the people on this side say that let those 1% rich people, or even to 20% richest people in the country, sacrifice and get the rest of the masses out of this mess. And if they do that, it is to their advantage also, because they can sell their products, they can live happily ever after. You know, the average man, as long as he has his $10, $15, and feeds his family. The nature of man is greedy, but the average man, his sight has not gone that far. He doesn't care whether he has a, he has a dining table which is $20,000 or a dining table which is $200. He doesn't care as much. He just wants to make sure that his family is fed, they're clothed, they have a little shelter. So if the rich man understands this, they would go along with what President Obama is suggesting. This is just common sense. Otherwise, there'll be riots in the streets. Do you get it? Do they get it? I hope so. Then they say provide health insurance for the masses, similar to other industrialized nations. Again, most other industrial nations, though, that they have health care, the health care costs may not be as efficient, many people say, may not be as good, but they take care of the masses for almost half the cost of here, because everything has become inflated here. If the CEO wants a salary of 10 million or 20 million, the dentist and the top surgeon doesn't want to work for 100,000 either. He wants to have 500,000, a million for his wages. So that has been also inflated in that fashion, and therefore the healthcare cost has become so amazingly expensive, unbelievable. You go and stay in hospital for 3-4 days, you get a bill for $100,000. So something has to be done. 12, they say put a brake on the greed and pillage of the resources by the 1%. So the impression is that this is just a pillage. This is robbery of the masses by that 1%. They have all the loopholes, all the system in their hands to amass fortunes and basically destroy the others. A reasonable formula has to be reached. We can't go on fooling people so that job creators. We're not going to touch job creators. We're going to give them more tax breaks. The average man would not buy it. And the intelligent man who has been fooled, would come around and say, no, they have been playing games with my psyche. And enough is enough. 13, make Congress accountable to people rather than only the 1% who control them. Along the same line, but that's the capitalistic system. If you have money, if you have lobby, if you can afford to pay the lobbyist, he will go and defend your rights. And so somehow some formula should be reached so that we know who is paying what congressman, and when he stands up and defends the job creators who has paid him the money for him to be so enthusiastic about their rights. 14, gamblers of Wall Street have to pay their fair share in taxes and penalties for the damage done to the country and the economy, rather than continuous pampering through bailouts and uncontrolled benefits and bonuses. All these issues are related in some ways. Again, the extreme of wealth and poverty. You have created a system from 1980s, that they refer, and then accelerated in 2000 and beyond. They refer to it, that's because an economic system proposed that the idea was that you enrich the richest, and what can they do with that money? And they have to invest it, reinvest it, and therefore the masses would also get something to do. This was the idea, at least that was the impression given. Now, some people who wised up refer to the system as Reaganomics, or trickle-down economics, which means that give all the funding, all the resources to the 1% wealthiest through tax breaks and loopholes and through lowering the tax rate, and that would trickle down. Well, the point is that it didn't trickle down. It backfired. It got worse. And then they call it Bushonomics, because also during the second President Bush reign, this tax breaks and loopholes became worse for the masses. And they had a point. They had the point that accumulation of wealth in the hands of the few can be better managed, and they can better provide resources for the masses. But those resources were taken away, but nothing really trickled back. This is what Jesse Jackson, in I believe 1987, in one of his talks, I'd never forget that, he says that's a system of taking it from the needy and giving it to the greedy. Basically, this became a system. This became a system that operated based on that principle. Next, 15, that says that get the country back through participation rather than the media and Congress being in the pocket of the few greedy, along the same line. Democracy, participation, engagement of the masses, so that voices of the people can be heard. 16, Congress should be more accountable in managing the huge debt and creating equity in the society. And we have multi-trillion-dollar debt, which a good portion of it was, over $1 trillion was spent in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which is still debatable, questionable for the logic and reason for it. And then the money which was bailing out the most incompetent bankers and Wall Street gamblers and incompetent corporations, and then again let the masses suffer because they're all disposable. You call it democracy, but they're disposable. If you take care of them, but don't take care of the rest, that is we consider them disposable. 17, deal with the question of the huge burden of people's debt and interest costs in an equitable fashion. Again, I refer to the question of interest and interest costs. We say that you don't have money, so even if you want to borrow money, we'll give you a little money, but then we'll charge you exorbitant interest. Interest charge cards, 18%, 20%, 24%, and banks, 7, 8, 9% for those who have not. So, but if the system is such that we say this human being is an asset in society and somehow will protect him, we won't let the bank charge him 9%, we won't let the credit card company charge him 24%. But we'll help him manage his finances, so that if he has a job, $15, we'll show him how he can save $1 of that 15 and then pay back his debt and then be charged an equitable interest rate. As I said, if a family has $1 that can afford to invest and leave it for the next generation, in a couple of hundred years, it becomes millions and then billions of dollars. And then the masses who have nothing, they remain destitute. So the average man cannot afford to pay $50,000 or $100,000 for a house. Has to borrow, and therefore the burden of debt is a huge burden. And then of course the burden of debt for college loans. A lot of people say that in all industrialized nations, they say that these are our people, this is our asset, so therefore we would find a way of funding them. So again, the resources have to be found, but if we find for equitable way of finding resources, everyone would benefit and no one would suffer, and the economy would become better because everyone is engaged, everyone is working, everyone can afford clothes and homes and furniture for the house. So then this is for the benefit of everybody. 18, somehow this has become a consumer culture. We have trained everybody to watch at these advertisements and then want things that they don't need. If you're one individual, you probably need 5 or 6 or 7 shirts or pants or dresses, But then you go to our closet and they have 50 and 60. And so maybe the other part of it is that we have to become more reasonable in our wants through not listening to a lot of these shows that force you to buy things that you don't need. And control your mind, control your emotions, control your thoughts. Be responsible for your own thoughts. Well, these are basically the issues. They make sense. Many of them are debatable, but then reasonable people would debate and would discuss and would find reasonable solution to the benefit of the masses of their countrymen. I was saddened to watch what goes on in New York and in Portland, particularly New York, where from various videos that I watched, it was very clear that unprovoked NYPD policemen attacked boys and girls, college students, many of them, attacked them, surrounded them, they pushed them on the concrete and shoved them into the police car in order to intimidate them against demonstrating, and also intimidate them if they have cameras, particularly if professional cameras, so that no evidence would be left of their atrocities. This is terrible. I'm sure that all these wonderful policemen, there are so many wonderful ones in this city and elsewhere, they have families. They don't want something like that to be done to their sons and their daughters. And they all perhaps go to church or to the synagogue or whatever else they worship, and somehow their conscience at some point will start to bother them. And the soonest they come to that point, the better, because then they become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. The police in this country and everywhere should be for the protection of people, not for harassing, intimidating, beating, and injuring their own citizens. This is vile, this is indecent, this is not human, and ultimately it's going to catch up with us. It's going to make their job a lot more difficult, and they become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. In that respect, I'm going to share with you this passage from the Hidden Words on the question of justice. Ultimately, even if the courts are corrupt and they would exonerate them, they won't be exonerated with God or their own conscience, the God within. O Son of Spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom, if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behoveth thee to be. Verily justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. Let me share with you a few more passages from the Hidden Words on the question of poverty and riches, and basically who we are. We are all divine in essence. No matter what party we're in, no matter who we are all divine in essence. Policemen, the demonstrators, we all want to do good on earth. So let's all bond together as a family of this great nation to bring equity and justice, and somehow have a little fear, if nothing else, of our own conscience. O Son of Man, I love thy creation, hence I created thee. Wherefore do thou love me, that I may name thy name and fill thy soul with the spirit of life. O Son of Being, with the hands of power I made thee, and with fingers of strength I created thee. And within thee I have placed the essence of my light. Be thou content with it, and seek naught else, for my work is perfect, and my command is binding. Question it not, nor have a doubt thereof. If we come to our essence, which is divine, we won't have any of these problems. The rich people, the NYPD, and some demonstrators who became violent, none of us would have this. We'd all see our brotherhood. We'd all see our divine essence. O Son of Man, bathed in my immemorial being and in the ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee, therefore I created thee, having graved on thee mine image, and revealed to thee my beauty. The question of man is made in the image of God, pure in its essence. O Son of Spirit, noble have I created thee, yet thou hast abased thyself. Arise then unto that for which thou wast created. If you're a policeman, you injure a demonstrator without cause, you have lost your nobility. In your inner spirit, you're noble, but you have done something that you should be ashamed of yourself, ashamed of that part of yourself. If I were you, some of these individuals, I don't know their names, I don't want to name them, you would go to the house of that girl that you injured and that young man that you injured. You would beg for their forgiveness and for God's forgiveness, rather than continuing with your arrogance. Someday, somehow, you'll be accountable. You'll be accountable. O Son of my handmaid, be not troubled in poverty, nor confident in riches, for poverty is followed by riches, and riches are followed by poverty. Yet to be poor in all save God is a wondrous gift. Belittle not the value thereof, for in the end it will make thee rich in God. And thus thou shalt know the meaning of the utterance, in truth ye are the poor, and the holy words, God is the all-possessing, shall even as the true morn break forth gloriously resplendent upon the horizon of the lover's heart, and abide secure on the throne of wealth. Well, that's on the issue of wealth and poverty. You know, we may be rich one day materially and then poor the other day, but ultimately we have to be rich in our spirit. If we have that, that is the most essential thing. That's the most important thing. And then we can persevere and then overcome our challenges. They who are possessed of riches must have the utmost regard for the poor, for great is the honor destined by God for those poor who are steadfast in patience. But my life, there is no honor except what God may please to bestow that can compare to this honor. Great is the blessedness awaiting the poor that endure patiently and conceal their sufferings. And well is it with the rich who bestow their riches on the needy and prefer them before themselves. Ultimately, if you're wealthy and you share it with the poor, the main reward comes to you yourself, for your conscience and for your comfort and for the peace of mind. And if you're poor, and if you persevere and your trust remains in God, you shall overcome. Say, I serve our God. No one is despised in the sight of the Almighty for being poor. Rather is he exalted if he is found to be of them who are patient. Blessed are the poor that are steadfast in patience. Most of these passages are from the hidden words. O Son of Being, thou art my lamp, and my light is in thee. Get thou from it thy radiance, and seek none other than me. For I have created thee rich, and have bountifully shed my favor upon thee. say, pride not yourselves on earthly riches. Reflect upon your end, and upon the recompense for your works that hath been ordained in the book of God, the exalted, the mighty. Blessed is the rich man whom earthly possessions have been powerless to hinder from turning unto God, the Lord of all names. Verily, he is accounted among the most distinguished of men before God, the gracious, the all-knowing. Riches has this problem. If you're poor, you probably are more trusting in God. If you're rich, you become negligent. So in this passage, in the Hebrew words, it says that blessed are those that riches do not become a veil for worshiping God. Of course, that God is essentially goodness. No one can claim to know the nature of God, but we can know God through virtues. And those virtues are compassion and justice and equity and kindness and love to your fellow man. When a rich man believes and follows the manifestation of God, it is a proof that this wealth is not an obstacle and that does not prevent him from attaining the pathway of salvation. After he has been tested and tried, it will be seen whether his possessions are a hindrance in his religious life. O son of man, should prosperity befall thee, rejoice not, and should abasement come upon thee, grieve not, for both shall pass away and be no more. If you understand it, we came to this world naked, and we'll go from this world naked. We won't just fight so much for materialism, whether we have it or we don't have it, and we'll begin sharing, and we'll begin becoming content. O son of being, if poverty overtake thee, be not sad. For in time the Lord of wealth shall visit thee. Fear not abasement, for glory shall one day rest on thee. O son of being, if thine heart be set upon the eternal, imperishable dominion, and this ancient, everlasting life, forsake this mortal and fleeting sovereignty. O son of being, busy not thyself with this world, for with fire we test the gold, and with gold we test our servants. So all of these things are for giving us a balance in not being materialistic, remaining compassionate, and in fact remaining content in many ways, so that we won't get into trouble. Either way, whether we are rich or poor. And then we understand our bond of brotherhood and friendship and love for one another. That is the ultimate solution. Abdul Baha was the son of the eldest son of the founder of the Baha'i faith, who came to this country over 100 years ago, about 100 years ago. And his first stop was New York. And one of the first places he went to in 1912, before World War I, was the house of the poor, of the homeless, where about 500 people resided. And he gave a talk. And that place in New York was called Baha'i Mission. I'd like to share with you the essence of what he said to these wonderful people. Tonight I'm very happy, for I've come here to meet my friends. I consider you my relatives, my companions. You must be thankful to God that you're poor, for Jesus Christ has said, "Blessed are the poor." He never said, "Blessed are the rich." He said too that the kingdom is for the poor, and that it is easier for a camel to enter a needle's eye than for a rich man to enter God's kingdom. Therefore you must be thankful to God that although in this world you are indigent, yet the treasures of God are within your reach, and although in the material realm you are poor, yet in the kingdom of God you are precious. Jesus himself was poor, He did not belong to the rich. He passed his time in the desert, traveling among the poor, and lived upon the herbs of the field. He had no place to lay his head, no home. He was exposed in the open to heat, cold, and frost, to inclement weather of all kinds. Yet he chose this rather than riches. If riches were considered glory, the prophet Moses would have chosen them. Jesus would have chosen to be a rich man. When Jesus Christ appeared, it was the poor who first accepted him, not the rich. Therefore, you are the disciples of Jesus Christ. You are his comrades, for he outwardly was poor, not rich. Even this earth's happiness does not depend upon wealth. You will find many of the wealthy exposed to dangers and troubled by difficulties, and in the last moments upon the bed of death, there remains the regret that they must be separated from that to which their hearts are so attached. They come into the world naked, and they must go from it naked. All they possess, they must leave behind and pass away solitary, alone. Often at the time of death, their souls are filled with remorse. And worst of all, their hope in the mercy of God is less than ours. Praise be to God. Our hope is in the mercy of God. And there is no doubt that the divine compassion is bestowed upon the poor. Jesus Christ said so. Baha'u'llah said so. While Baha'u'llah was in Baghdad, still in possession of great wealth, he left all he had and went alone from the city, living 2 years among the poor. They were his companions. He ate with them, slept with them, and gloried in being one of them. He chose for one of his names the title of the Poor One, and often in his writings referred to himself as Dervish, which in Persian means poor. And of this title he was very proud. He admonished all that we must be the servants of the poor, helpers of the poor, remember the sorrows of the poor, associate with them, for thereby we may inherit the kingdom of heaven. God has not said that there are mansions prepared for us if we pass our time associating with the rich, but he has said that there are many mansions prepared for the servants of the poor, for the poor are very dear to God. The mercies and bounties of God are with them. The rich are mostly negligent, inattentive, steeped in worldliness, depending upon their means, whereas the poor are dependent upon God, and their reliance is upon him, not upon themselves. Therefore the poor are nearer the threshold of God and his throne. Jesus was a poor man. One night, when he was out in the fields, the rain began to fall. He had no place to go for shelter, so he lifted his eyes toward heaven, saying, O Father, for the birds of the air thou hast created nests, for the sheep a fold, for the animals dens, for the fish places of refuge, but for me thou hast provided no shelter. There is no place where I may lay my head. My bed consists of the old ground, of the cold ground. My lamp at night are the stars, and my food is the grass of the field. Yet, who upon earth is richer than I am? For the greatest blessing thou hast not given to the rich and mighty, but unto me, for thou hast given me the poor. To me thou hast granted this blessing. They are mine. Therefore am I the richest man on earth. So, my friends, you are following in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. Your lives are similar to his life. Your attitude is like unto his. You resemble him more than the rich do. Therefore, we will thank God that we have been so blessed with real riches. And in conclusion, I ask you to accept me, Abdul Baha, as your servant. This book, Some Answered Questions, provides answers to hundreds of questions raised. The year was 1908 by a lady whose name was Clifford Barney, who went to Haifa in Israel and interviewed Abu Baha, who had just been released from a long period of captivity by the Persian and Ottoman empires. Among those questions was this question of wealth and poverty, and the question of workers, and at that time there was amazing exploitation of workers, and just like what has happened now, there were a few rich people who were exploiting them, giving them the least, if at all, for whoever worked for them. And Abu Baha says, the principal cause of these difficulties lies in the laws of the present civilization. A lot of laws have been passed, including Social Security and Medicare, and basically some system of safety net, but a lot more needs to be done to reach a level of equity, because a lot of things which were done were reversed from 1980s. We were reaching a symbol of balance during 1950s and 1960s. The principal cause of these difficulties lies in the laws of the present civilization, for they lead to a small number of individuals accumulating incomparable wealth, fortunes beyond their needs, while the greater number remain destitute, stripped, and in the greatest misery. This is contrary to justice, to humanity, to equity. It is the height of inequity, the opposite to what causes divine satisfaction. This contrast is peculiar to the world of man. With other creatures, this is to say, with nearly all animals, there's a kind of justice and equality. Thus, equality exists in the shepherd's flock and in a herd of deer in the country, likewise among the birds of the prairie, of the plain, of the hills, or of the orchard, and among every kind of animal, some kind of equality prevails. With them, such a difference in the means of existence is not to be found. So they live in the most complete peace and joy. It is quite otherwise with the human species, which persists in the greatest error, in absolute inequity. Consider an individual who has amassed treasures by colonizing a country for his profit. He has obtained an incomparable fortune and has secured profits and incomes which flow like a river, while 100,000 unfortunate people, weak and powerless, are in need of a mouthful of bread. There is neither equality nor benevolence. So you see the general peace and joy are destroyed, and the welfare of humanity is negated to such an extent as to make fruitless the lives of many. For fortune, honors, commerce, industry are in the hands of some industrialists, while other people are submitted to quite a series of difficulties and to limitless troubles. They have neither advantages nor profits, nor comforts nor peace. Then rules and laws should be established to regulate the excessive fortunes of certain private individuals. These are the 1%. And that's the Congress job, right? And meet the needs of millions of the poor masses. Thus a certain moderation would be obtained. However, absolute equality is just as impossible. For absolute equality in fortunes, honors, commerce, agriculture, industry would end in disorderliness. So by no means are we asking for equality. Equality in opportunity, yes. And opportunities should be provided, but not the equality in the income they make, but there has to be equity. So it ends in disorderness, in chaos, and in disorganization of the means of existence, and in universal disappointment. The order of the community would be quite destroyed. Thus difficulties would also arise when unjustified equality is imposed. So it's just the opposite of communism, or just rampant socialism. So either method, when it comes to the extreme, is harmful. And now we have come to the point of unbridled capitalism, when 1% just own the means of production, the means of distribution, and they basically tell us, if you don't want it, we'll discard you, and you can basically disappear or die, and we care less. And this system cannot continue. It is therefore preferable for moderation to be established by means of laws and regulations to hinder the constitution of the excessive fortunes of certain individuals and to protect the essential needs of the masses. For instance, the manufacturers and industrialists heap up the treasure each day, and the poor artisans do not gain their daily sustenance. That is the height of inequity, and no just man can accept it. Therefore, laws and regulations should be established. Over and over again, I think if I said it 100 more times, and we say it 100 more times, we still need to say it. Regulations and laws, which would permit the workmen to receive from the factory owner their wages and a share of profit sharing, not only with the CEO, but with everyone who brings the success to the firm. Therefore, so these laws then would permit the workmen to receive from the factory their wages and a share of fourth or fifth of the profit, according to the capacity of the factory, or in some order that the body of workmen and manufacturers should share equitably the profits and advantages. Indeed, the capital and management come from the owner of the factory, and the work and labor from the body of the workmen. So he goes on explaining this thesis that profit should be shared, the idea of profit sharing. And then goes on in other writings and tablets, explaining the importance of progressive taxation, what we had in 1950s and 1960s and 1970s. And so reversal of that, has created this amazing inequality in the world, in this country and everywhere. So I'm going to share with you a few passages from this book, which is called Light of God Guidance, or Lights of Guidance. So on the question of economics, or at least some hints as to what we should do to get us out of this mess that we are in right now. One issue is on the importance of agriculture. Agriculture is the foundation of everything in medicine and even for energy. We're finding out, and for food and for living, agriculture is significant. So it should remain significant. Because since industrialization, we have basically, in many ways, in many parts of the world, agriculture has been ignored. So this deals with that question. It says, strive as much as possible to become proficient in the science of agriculture. For in accordance with the divine teachings, the acquisition of sciences and the perfection of arts are considered as acts of worship. In the Baha'i faith, work in the spirit of worship, work in the spirit of service is considered worship. If a man engages with all his power in the acquisition of a science or in the perfection of an art, it is as if he has been worshipping God in the churches and temples. Thus, as thou enterest the school of agriculture and strivest in the acquisition of that science, thou art day and night engaged in acts of worship, acts that are accepted as the threshold of the Almighty. What bounty greater than this, that science should be considered as an act of worship and art as service to the kingdom of God. So in the Baha'i faith, of course, there are prayers and meditations, but a good portion of the person's life and time should be spent in work, and that work should be with the spirit of serving society. So if you're engaged in a work that harms society, is not useful, and there's so many of them, I don't want to name them, then you can think that this harms This brings cancer, this kind of profession that I'm in, or causes disease, or cause people to become unhealthy. So that's not work in the spirit of service. But if our work is in the spirit of service, then it is worship. Then we love what we do and become close to the Master of the universe, or to our own inner being, which is God within. Now, then there is discussion on the question of progressive taxation. Those who have more would have to pay more in order to fund the operation of the needs of society to be fulfilled, and for the government not to be in so much deficit. And of course, as everyone is working and is contributing, then the country would not have to be a welfare society either. Everybody is engaged, and everybody is contributing something to running the affairs of the country. So, but then specifically in terms of what it should be spent for, he explains on healthcare and safety, public safety, that is policemen and good policemen to protect us, and for hygiene and for education, and for running the affairs of the state, and then for supporting the orphanage, and for supporting cripples and incurable, that many people can't take care of themselves, then that becomes the duty of society to take care of them. Because if we see us as members of the same family, that's the way we would do if that was our son or daughter. And that's the way we would feel for the whole society. And then there'll be peace on earth as a result of this humane way of treating human beings. And then they indicate supporting educational institutions. If we support educational institutions, and of course professors also are paid a fair wage rather than 150,000, 200,000 salaries, then we don't have to have these poor kids who go to college for 6 or 8 years, and until they're 45 or 50, they have to pay back their loans with interest. You know, something has to be worked out in that connection. There are many other issues discussed on the question of equity and the question of economics. Here he says that the system that prevents, among others, the gradual control of wealth in the hands of a few. Progressive taxation is a way of it. The other way is for the individuals to become philanthropic themselves. And the resulting state of both extremes, wealth and poverty, should be avoided. You know the passage? It says that the teachings of Baha'u'llah advocate voluntary sharing. And this is a greater thing than the equalization of wealth. For equalization must be imposed from without, while sharing is a matter of free choice. I'm sure that you have gone to soup kitchens, you have gone to help the needy at some point. If this becomes part of the routine of our life, it makes us all happier and more fulfilled human beings. And then there won't be a lot of people suffering. Then he says social inequality is the inevitable outcome of the natural inequality of men. There's nothing wrong with it. Not everyone has to be equal and have equal pay. Human beings are different in ability and should, therefore, be different in their social and economic standing. Extremes of wealth and poverty should, however, be totally abolished. Those whose brains have contributed to the creation and improvement of the means of production, or somebody becomes like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, they have to be paid more. So they must be fairly rewarded, but not in billions. Though these means may be owned and controlled by others. I would say perhaps if they reward in billions and then they reinvest back in the firms in order for more innovations, there's nothing wrong with it. But if it is all spent on luxuries and on hedonism and on greed, then of course that is harmful to them and to the society at large. Whatever the progress of the machinery may be, man will have always to toil in order to earn his living. Work is very important. Effort is an inseparable part of man's life. It may take different forms with the changing conditions of the world, but it will be always present as a necessary element in our earthly existence. Life is, after all, a struggle. Progress is attained through struggle, and without such a struggle, life ceases to have a meaning. It becomes even extinct. The progress of machinery has not made efforts unnecessary, it has given it a new form, a new outlet. You know, there used to be more physical work, now there's more mental work and office work, and of course, hopefully less hours as they become less materialistic. Then he says, by the statement, the economic solution is divine in nature, is meant that religion alone can at last resort bring in man's nature such a fundamental change as to enable him to adjust the economic relationships of society. It is only in this way that man can control the economic forces that threaten to disrupt the foundation of his existence and thus assert his mastery over the forces of nature. So we work, we are equitable, we're just, both individually and as a nation, and then we help those who can't help themselves if they have some impairment. But then if they're able and can work, we'll provide them jobs. Finally, this is a passage from a booklet that the Baha'i Universal House Justice issued in 1985 and distributed widely. Hundreds of thousands of this copies of this was distributed among people of all backgrounds. It's called The Promise of World Peace. It deals with all issues of war and peace and equity and justice, and a portion of it deals with also economics and race issues and all of that. So here, let me just share with you a couple passages as conclusion of this segment. Racism is a baneful evil and is a major barrier to peace. So in some of these segments that I've watched recently on, of course, Wall Street and what is happening, I was saddened by some racist comments or some comments against some religions or some religious people. We are all members of the same family. And here it says, the inordinate disparity between rich and poor keeps the world in a state of instability, virtually on the brink of war. Unbridled nationalism must give way to a wider loyalty to the love of humanity as a whole. So a lot of these economic issues are global, and we cannot insulate ourselves and isolate ourselves. We have to deal with them also on an international global level. Yes, first and foremost on a national level, but then on a global level as well, in order for US to keep its leadership. Religious strife, the cause of innumerable wars and conflicts, is increasingly abhorrent to people of all faiths and no faith. Whether you follow a religious path or you're atheist or agnostic, you're all my brothers and sisters. There's absolutely no difference. Nobody knows the nature of God, and however way you want to worship, this is your right. And if your mind is free and you're peaceful and go to your divine essence, you will see the beauty within yourself and within everybody around you. The achievement of full equality between the sexes is one of the most important prerequisites of peace. There is still a large portion of the world where there's absolute inequality between men and women. If we want to see peace in the world, if we want to see justice in the world, compassion, equity in the world, all of us, men and women, should be cognizant of it and work toward that peace that includes equality between the rights of men and women. In the Middle East, in the Far East, in the Near East, and even still in this country, in Europe, total equality has not been achieved. We have come a long way, but we have a long way to go. Universal education deserves the utmost support that governments can lend it, for ignorance is the principal reason for the decline and fall of peoples. So all of us should join hands an attempt in finding ways to provide affordable education for our children. A fundamental lack of communication between people seriously undermines efforts toward world peace. Thanks to YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and other means of communication, it is so much easier to communicate. If a level of civility is reached and we don't insult each other when we converse, we can go a long way. We can still go a long way. 2 points we're emphasizing. One is that the abolition of war is not simply a matter of signing treaties and protocols, but a complex task that requires a new level of commitment. And that by itself is a huge issue that needs to be addressed. I'm not sure if this passage was included in this discussion or not, but let me make sure before we conclude this section. And that is from the Universal Justice. I guess part of it was read, but let me read this passage that the inordinate disparity between rich and poor, a source of acute suffering, keeps the world in a state of instability, virtually on the brink of war. Few societies have dealt effectively with this situation. The solution calls for the combined application of the spiritual, moral, and practical approaches. A fresh look at the problem is required, entailing consultation with experts from a wide spectrum of disciplines, devoid of economic and ideological polemics, and involving the peoples directly affected in the decisions that must urgently be made. You know, unfortunately, a lot of people have become, have followed one ideology or the other. If we start listening to one another and find solutions, which is not from that party or the other party, but rather is reasonable. When we go to the essence of our divinity, we can find all those solutions, and no problem would be insurmountable. So a fresh look at the problem is required. It is an issue that is bound up not only with the necessity for eliminating extremes of wealth and poverty, but also with those spiritual verities, the understanding of which can produce a new universal attitude. Fostering such an attitude is itself a major part of the solution. If we have the attitude of consultation, of conversing, of respecting one another, policemen and demonstrators and the Congress and the President and everyone, I have no doubt that we will find the solutions very quickly. It doesn't have to take a long time. Let me share with you in this concluding segment some prayers from Baha'i writings for healing our minds, because in order to find solutions to the problems, we need to have healing to our minds. O my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavor, and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge, and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord. My God, my adored one, my King, my desire, what tongue can voice my thanks to thee? I was heedless, thou didst awaken me. I turned back from thee, thou didst graciously aid me to turn toward thee. I was as one dead, thou didst quicken me with the water of life. I was withered, thou didst revive me with the heavenly stream of thine utterance, which hath flowed forth from the pen of the All-Merciful. O divine providence, all existence is begotten by thy bounty. Deprive it not of the water of thy generosity, neither do thou withhold it from the ocean of thy mercy. I beseech thee to aid and assist me at all times, under all conditions, and seek from the heaven of thy grace thine ancient favor. Thou art in truth the Lord of bounty, and the sovereign of the kingdom of eternity. O God, refresh and gladden my spirit, purify my heart, illumine my powers. I lay all my affairs in thy hand. Thou art my guide and my refuge. I will no longer be sorrowful and grieved. I'll be a happy and joyful being. O God, I shall no longer be full of anxiety, nor will I let trouble harass me. I will not dwell on the unpleasant things of life. O God, thou art more friend to me than I am to myself. I dedicate myself to thee, O Lord.